Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You may know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, we're a little late getting into all of this. I just hope that the cleanse you are taking has made it so that you are thankful and ready to do the show.
I have evacuated every orifice.
That's just good advice for all of us. And I don't think anyone should necessarily follow the Aaron Rodgers method, let alone with diet or, family or anything really. But
medical advice.
Yeah, medical
relationships,
advice.
Apparently.
Yeah, let's just avoid that and get into the show. It is the off season once again. We're at the every 2 weeks thing. Sorry? Somebody was actually asking for us to do weekly shows again. It's like, boy,
man,
there's
man.
there's only so much there's only so much B corner we can do that we can get into here. Unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at.
We only want to put out the A B content. We don't want to put out the B content.
Really?
It was right there. Sorry.
So welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Again, hope you guys are all doing well. We're doing the once every 2 weeks thing for a little while. Enjoy the show. Patreon people actually just got a bonus episode yesterday as a result of us not recording yesterday. So check that on out. Patreon.com/NorseCode is where you can get your bonus material if you enjoy the show, would like to support us, would like to keep us ad-free, all of that. You can do that, which will also mean you get access to the Discord server, which I didn't think was going to be as popular as it is. I'd been threatening to do it for 2 years, and we had a number of people sign up for it, and there's been a lot of interesting, fun discussion, and as you can imagine, the Case Cookus stuff exploded.
Yeah, that was huge.
I'm
a little. You can explain. I'm a little upset about my involvement in the Case Cookus situation.
So before I get to the people who donated on Patreon, I want to talk about what happened yesterday because we were going to record on Monday, and I didn't have much of a voice. So we move it to Tuesday. Tuesday, it snows 3-4 inches in Minneapolis. Arif shovels. Arif is physically dead afterwards. Can't do it.
Yeah, I am not only out of shape. I have quite a bit of stuff to shovel.
As it turns out. So, he falls asleep, can't record. No less than half an hour later, Case Cookus is drafted by the Philadelphia team for the USFL, and my phone explodes. And Arif and I would have been recording during this, yes. And I'm just kicking myself over the fact that we didn't have this live reveal moment.
Yeah, it would have exceeded our live reaction to Myles Garrett beaning Mason Rudolph in the head.
Easily.
For sure. Yeah.
Without question. It would have been one of the greatest moments in the entire show's history.
Yeah. And, I'm sorry I did physical labor. I promise to avoid it at every possible instance in the future in order to prevent such a situation from occurring again. I apologize to everyone who's impacted by this fact. And next time I will consider the importance and value of content over the physical health and safety of the Postal Service worker who services our house.
Exactly. It's for content. He can deal with whatever situation he's going to have as a part of workman's comp and the mail. I know at least one mailman who listens to this show. I'm sure in his cold heart of hearts, he can begrudgingly agree to this. So
I'm going to need feedback from that person on what I just said.
Well, welcome to the show. People who have donated on Patreon, just want to give a quick shout out to a couple people. William Sparks, thank you so much for joining. Alex KP, again, thank you. Ken Poklitar, sure. Ken, thank you so much. And the South Dakota Pigeon, thank you. And there's a message from the pigeon, which is just a fun sentence to say, but here we are. Hello, James and Arif, and any other mysterious allies in the shadows. Longtime listener, first-time subscriber, lifetime sufferer of purple pain. Thanks for continually helping me cope, and thanks for almost always bringing logic and reason to the discussion of this team that has held a hold over my heart since I was a child. Many thanks. So thank you so much to the South Dakota Pigeon. We've got the bonus episode that just came out for the Patreon people. That came out yesterday. I believe that's episode 47 of the bonus stuff. We're also going to be doing some future stuff over at Patreon and the Discord. If you've ever wanted to be a part of a Discord that involved Don from Ohio, although I think he keeps on getting muted by you, so...
Well, no, he's been muted once, and it was for 10 minutes. He just hasn't chosen to speak since then.
Oh, is that it? But yeah, check out the Discord. We've got a fun Discord out there for Patreon people, so check us out over at patreon.com/NorseCode. Get your bonus stuff and get your access to the Discord. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well if you'd like to donate to the show there. Or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com as well and pick up a shirt or cup or whatever you'd like to do to help support Norse Code. Again, thank you guys so much for listening, especially during the off season. Before we start the actual show proper, just a quick recap on our prop bets, because some of this got ugly. At least from the very beginning of our prop bets, it looked like this was going to be a landslide. So just a couple of these that are worth mentioning. Which player will be shown on film first during the national anthem? We were both wrong. It was Burrow. But which coach will it be shown first on camera? I had said McVay. I was right. Who will appear in the Super Bowl commercial first? The Clydesdales or Megan Thee Stallion? I was right with the Clydesdale. You'll notice a pattern here. Which will be shown first during any Super Bowl commercial? Rocket, moon, astronaut, or alien? That was me again with the rocket. Which will be the first penalty of the game? We all lost. That was the dude with the hoodie on the field from Cincinnati.
Is that how Vegas scored it?
Yep. The first penalty was on him, and I forget exactly what it counted as, but yeah, we all lost on that.
That's incredible.
First team to call a timeout, I was right with Cincinnati. My license to print money bet came through with the Stafford pass completions of over 24.5. How many punts will there be in the game? I took the over, so I won again on this. Who will have the longest catch? Arif got that. Jamar Chase over Cooper Kupp, 22 yards to 46. Who will be the first to sing, rap, speak, whatever on the show? You got Dre on that, and then we lost every single Super Bowl prop bet for halftime.
So we got that one and lost all of the rest. All of them. Fantastic.
Will somebody do the Icky Shuffle? I was right on no. And Arif went meta for which one will be the first that is said during one of the commercials. It's like meta, NFT, and all of that. So it was 6-4.
Which NFT, I believe, appeared in text before meta was ever said aloud, but obviously they were very specific on which one would be said aloud.
Exactly. So yep. So that's where we ended up being at for the prop bets. Just we had a couple of requests to do the prop bet recap. So for the first time in years, we're going to do that. So here you go. Let's talk about some Vikings news, because the Vikings hired a head coach. They have an offensive coordinator. They have a defensive coordinator. Let's start with the Kevin O'Connell stuff and kind of your impressions after the press conference and your article.
Yeah. So the article comes after the press conference. The press conference, probably most people listening to the show watched it. I thought it was a pretty good showing from Kevin O'Connell. It was a press conference that I don't know that there were many coaches that have bad press conferences, right? So I'll put that out there. I will say that Joe Judge, when he was introduced his presser, I think a lot of people really liked and applauded, and I watched it and I did not love it. And so there is something to be said about kind of the implied values that the coach will pursue through the use of that press conference, talking about how they wanted to be a tough team and a blue collar team, and they wanted to reflect, the city of New York and being blue collar, which what city isn't blue collar, but fine, whatever. But yeah, okay, fine. But in terms of the actionable stuff that he would say in that press conference, none of it was all that, exciting or enticing to me. So I will say that even though coaches do generally have impressive press conferences by consensus, I think you can kind of, I don't know, read between the lines a little bit, and kind of see if your understanding of the way football should operate and what your football philosophy is matches with the way that they kind of indicate that their understanding in football philosophy is. And I think that aside from showing charisma and confidence and the ability to communicate a lot of ideas, I think that O'Connell showcased a couple of things that interest me as a journalist. So stuff like the fact that he is very transparent in terms of the way that he wanted to answer questions, and was very open about specifics. The fact that he answered questions directly instead of indirectly, Kirk Cousins stuff aside, which we'll talk about that. I thought that's good for me as a journalist. So I don't have to kind of constantly dance around stuff, which, mind you, Mike Zimmer started off by talking about by answering questions directly. And it wasn't until kind of later that it felt like we had to figure out how to read between the lines. And of course, every so often, then he would go back to answering questions very bluntly. But there's all of that. I think that he demonstrated a lot of understanding of the way the game is evolving, which I think is really important. The fact that he had indicated essentially, and he wasn't asked this directly, so I think it doesn't contradict anything for me to say that he answered this question basically implicitly by saying that the Vikings are essentially going to be a pass-first team that's going to run the ball when teams invite the run, right? And so they're going to be focused on finding ways to get the ball into the position of their skill players, or to their skill players in space, which generally means the passing game, and that the passing game is kind of primary. I thought that was a good thing. There's also kind of stuff that I was able to kind of learn later on just by talking to people who knew Kevin O'Connell or people around the organization, and some of that stuff I think also was really nice. I think, for example, we're going to see better integration of the way the coaching staff and the front office use analytics, right? Like, I think we always understand, hey, it looks like the coaching staff and the front office are in lockstep, which they were at the beginning of the Zimmer era and they were not by the end. That obviously is what it looks like here. But I also think that we're going to see a more integrated use of conversations brought about by analysis of data into the way that not just the front office is conducted, but the way that the coaching staff kind of conducts things. So, I think that there's this understanding that Mike Zimmer is anti-analytics, and I think phrased that way he is, but he did employ a lot of tools that a lot of analytics nerds really liked. Like, for example, GPS tracking during practices to try and figure out player load and stuff like that in order to prevent injuries and maximize performance on game day and stuff like that. So there is some element to that, but I do think that we're going to see closer integration between O'Connell and in the analytics department, and also Adolfo-Mensah in the analytics department. I think that that's just going to be a big part of the organization. I obviously, really like that. I was able to kind of figure out whether or not the Vikings would be as 11 personnel heavy as the Rams were. I'm a huge advocate of going 3 wide receiver. I've written a couple of articles basically every year saying that the Vikings should approach this more. The Vikings finally did do it this year a little bit, but they were still near the bottom of the league. And obviously Kevin O'Connell is going to drastically increase the number of snaps the Vikings are going to play with 3 wide receivers in the field, but that doesn't mean that they'll get rid of CJ Ham or that they'll stop finding ways to deploy 2 tight end sets. I think that one thing that O'Connell likes is the ability to kind of isolate matchups. And if the opposing team has a third linebacker that's not as good as their nickel corner, which many teams, have that deficiency because of the way, investment in coaching in the college cycle works, he's still willing to kind of play CJ Ham. And if they re-sign Tyler Conklin as the second tight end to Irv Smith, and find ways to do that. I also tried to figure out if he had plans for Irv Smith. And my understanding is that we'll probably see a different usage for Irv Smith that I think is a little bit better suited to my understanding of the way Irv Smith plays. So there's a lot of stuff that I like. Some of the stuff is more kind of behind the scenes that, you can't tell from the press conference. Some of the stuff is in the press conference that you like. And then I also wrote a piece about, my study of what the Rams did offensively, plus, what insights we're able to glean from Kevin O'Connell. Some interesting stuff about kind of how close he is as a play caller in the Rams. He's going to be the play caller for the Vikings. He confirmed that in the presser as well. And, kind of what experience he has. Because I tweeted out back before Kevin O'Connell was confirmed and a bunch of people were critical of the idea of hiring him, I tweeted out, I don't actually think that play calling experience is all that important in determining whether or not somebody should be a head coach. Now, if he's going to be the play caller, that's like pretty critical information for us to have. But it turns out his experience with game day play calling, I think, is a little bit more expansive than he was given credit for. So obviously he did that in 2018 when he took over as offensive coordinator for, I think, the second half of the season, or at least took over as play caller. Well, there wasn't great results or anything like that. But I think that his role in the Rams offense has been really understated by a lot of fans because McVay would constantly consult with him to call plays and figure out what they're doing. Like he would be making decisions that would actualize on the field. Like it wasn't just McVay was like, "What do you think of this?" "Yeah, I think that's good." It was McVay can't think of a play, and O'Connell would suggest the play, and they would run it. Right? Like he would be directly calling plays at points. And then there's moments in games where he was formally delegated with the task of calling plays. So these are things that he would do, right? So I don't think that that the relationship that people imply in terms of like what he did with the offense is as minimal as people say. And then he put the plays in the playbook for what they would be doing that game based off of the opponent. He would game plan. He would identify weaknesses. He would, determine how the quarterback should go through the reads that week on particular plays. Like he was really involved in the offense, and he helped design what that offense would look like that year. So those are all things that I kind of learned, and I kind of put that in the piece over at The Athletic about, what the offense is going to look like.
Well, let's talk about what he had said about Kirk Cousins, because a lot of ink has been spilled over whether or not this was a genuine, we really like him, we really want him to stay, or if this was just kind of, I have to say this because he's currently on the roster.
So my interpretation of the way they have been somewhat, but not really cagey about Cousins, is that they are negotiating a contract extension with him. Again, that's my interpretation. That's not me breaking any news, although if someone broke that news, it wouldn't surprise me. I don't think that they are signaling that they're going to move on in the same way that the Lions basically signaled they were moving on, the Rams signaled that they were moving on from Jared Goff, because they said the line about, well, he's under contract, right? But O'Connell added on to that, and then Adofo-Mensah added on to that about designing an offense around him and how excited they are to work with him, and that they think that he's a good quarterback. And we saw 8 different leaks on 8 different days from like Pelissero and Breer and Rappaport about how much they like Cousins and want to build an offense around him. I think that that's all fine. We didn't see that with Jared Goff and the Rams. So I think that all kind of implies that they want Cousins in the building and to be their quarterback for 2022. But I think the reason that they're not committing in as strong a language as you might expect is because they are in somewhat of a contract limbo, and they do kind of want a little bit of an out in the 10% or 5% or 1% scenario where they cannot negotiate a contract extension with Cousins and then do have to put him on the market. So I don't think that they are trying to trade him. I think that all they're doing is not closing any doors by saying this sort of stuff, because I think if you kind of read into some of the comments that have blown up saying that, hey, O'Connell was on this show and he said, yeah, he's under contract. We'd love to, make sure we get the most out of that contract, or, whatever, right? You will always find follow-ups in those comments from O'Connell or from Adofo-Mensah that are very strongly worded in the direction of keeping Cousins, which is why it's kind of funny to kind of see this play out on Twitter, because, if you think that the Vikings are going to trade Cousins, or you're very committed to the idea that they will, you can find the kind of quotes and read between the lines and use that. Or if it's the opposite, if you think that they're going to keep Cousins, you can find the quotes, and you probably have to do a little bit less in between the lines reading, but you can find your interpretation of what he said and do that. And both are kind of somewhat valid claims. And so you're tweeting it back and forth. And I think all that's really happening is they're just not shutting a door, right? They want to be able to enter these contract negotiations and say, well, all right, fine. If you don't want to reduce your cap hit from $45 million by taking on this extension that gives you an average of $38 million over the next 3 or 4 years, then we will open the door to, trades, or we will kind of figure out what needs to be done, in the long term, right? Like they don't want to enter these negotiations losing leverage. I think that's what's happening. So my interpretation of events, but I think it makes the most sense with the way that they have both committed to Cousins in a roundabout sense and in a soft sense, but also have been cagey about, whether or not he's going to be the quarterback. So I think that kind of strikes, maybe the middle ground is the wrong word, but it kind of strikes the balance that we're kind of looking for in terms of trying to figure out what the totality of what the public statements from the team are.
This is going to be the decision of the offseason. The decision as to what's going to end up happening with Cousins. There's been quote-unquote rumors about other teams trying to make plays, specifically a discussion about Carolina, who appears to just be asking the whole league, hey, what's your quarterback situation like? What's your price? So, understandably, this is a hot issue amongst Vikings faithful. And boy, I cannot wait to see the Civil War break out as to which side are you on for the Kirk Cousins, what feels like an inevitable Kirk Cousins extension.
Yeah, it does feel inevitable. And you're right. All decisions for the Vikings flow from there. So if they can't get Cousins under the cap, if they're forced to trade him, if the weird rumor is the wrong word for this one too, actually. So there's a report that the Carolina Panthers called the Vikings in order to inquire about Cousins, and the Vikings rebuffed them. None of this is a rumor. This is all just what has been reported, right? The idea that this will result in a Carolina Panthers trade, I guess, is a rumor, but no one is floating it. Everyone's just speaking as if it's a thing. No, the Vikings said no, right? And I don't know if the Vikings have like this hard no, where they're just saying, no, we're absolutely not going to trade our franchise quarterback. Or if it's a soft no, and it's basically like, I cannot believe you offered what you offered. That's ridiculous. What you're offering is just not the price for a starting quarterback in the NFL. Those are two different kinds of no's, right? I don't know which no it is, right? So fine. But if, for example, the trade that's been kind of floating around is some combination of players plus Cousins for some combination of picks and players for the 6th overall pick, right? It would be wild for the Vikings to say no to that. To the 6th overall pick, crazy to me that the Vikings would say no to that.
The 6th overall pick in a draft without a quarterback.
Right. Well, so that's what I was going to... The next thing I wanted to say is, if you don't like the quarterbacks in this draft, I understand why that does not initially seem appealing to you. But you can trade the 6th overall pick for multiple future firsts, like, period, right? You can trade the 6th overall pick for someone's entire draft. So I think that you can... just say, hey, I don't like the quarterbacks in this class. I don't like a single one of them. And maybe they said no to the 6th overall pick, pending their evaluation of the quarterbacks in this class, right? But so they might, crack open the film on a particular quarterback and just say, all right, let's call Carolina, see what they have to say. But if you don't like the quarterbacks in this class, you could still use the 6th overall pick to get a quarterback in the next class. So that doesn't surprise me, or that doesn't stop me from saying that that's an amazing deal. So I would say it would be shocking if Carolina offered the 6th overall pick and the Vikings said no. But yeah, I think that really the Vikings are basically saying no because they don't think anyone's going to meet what they might put as their price. But that doesn't mean that there's not a price. It just might be much, much higher than you would think.
Yeah, Spielman had said something similar to that last year or the year before, talking about, everybody talks to everybody about what everyone's price is. Like, we just we go in, we just check just to see what if something is like movable or whatever. But overall, it's not a surprise to have these sorts of conversations. It was a bit surprising to have sort of that sort of thing like confirmed as far as the
Right. Yeah,
Carolina
that's
thing was
right. Yeah,
concerned. But like other than that, this is the sort of thing that happens. But I just want to say, I appreciate the work that you do out on this beat because you did some real looking into the potential of CJ Ham in the future, and that is something near and dear to my heart, as it is to many of our listeners. So, what did we learn more about the CJ Ham situation?
That the Vikings like him, that Kevin O'Connell likes him, and that they'll find ways to use him.
Good enough. I don't want any of this, cutting Ham stuff going on. Like Ham needs to stay on the team. I just picked up his jersey, damn it. I don't want him to go yet. That happens like every year I pick up a jersey for somebody, so.
Yeah, I mean, I understand, like, oh man, I picked up this jersey, they moved on. I picked up this jersey, they moved on. Wow, there's no way the Vikings would move on from CJ Ham.
Yeah,
he's a franchise cornerstone.
Listen, he was like the number 1 or number 2 receiver for a couple of games this year. You don't do that unless you get it projected first from Buffalo. Just throwing that out there.
Mm-hmm.
Also worth mentioning is Wes Phillips is coming with Kevin O'Connell to the Vikings from the Rams.
Yeah, so he was the tight ends coach / pass game coordinator, which when you add in the pass game coordinator stuff, because you think, wait, what did Kevin O'Connell do? Which fair enough. But he's been a tight ends coach for years and years and years and years. So he worked with Jason Witten for 1 year. I think a year that Jason Witten got like 800 yards. So great. He worked in Washington for a while, obviously with the whole Washington group that everyone's very enamored with. But that included Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis, both having really excellent years with him. Obviously, he was the tight ends coach in Los Angeles, where Tyler Higbee, who has been credibly accused of a hate crime, had a pretty good year under him. And yeah, that doesn't really mean anything in terms of his ability to be an offensive coordinator. He's going to take on the role that Kevin O'Connell took on in Los Angeles, and I have no idea how good he's going to be at that. The notable thing about him, of course, is that he is the grandson of Bum Phillips, the son of Wade Phillips. Everyone kind of knows this about him. There was kind of a little bit of a question because the Rams running backs coach, I want to say, Thomas Brown, was the run game coordinator. He was also interviewed for the offensive coordinator job, and he didn't get it. It was Wes Phillips. There's a question here about kind of not that Kevin O'Connell did something racist, but rather the practices of the NFL having difficulty finding places for black coaches and people of color in positions to be put on the head coach track, because running backs coach is very often not the head coach track. Quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator is. And so one of the times that a running backs coach gets to be put in that position, and they don't get that opportunity, it always kind of raises an eyebrow. So that was kind of a question. Then you tag on the fact that Wes Phillips, obviously got involved into football because he's the son of Wade Phillips. And, we had that nepotism conversation a couple episodes ago. That's part of the whole conversation. And if Wes Phillips underperforms, certainly that deserves additional scrutiny, but it deserves some scrutiny now. And so, yeah, I don't know how the interview went. I don't know kind of, what kind of the behind the scenes is. And one of the things that are brought up is that on an individual level, you can always justify all of these things. And it's the systemic level where you begin to notice patterns where something's a problem. And so it's very difficult to accuse any one person of making a decision that is like racist or something like that. But because the system at large produces these outcomes, there's very clearly something lurking in the background. Here, I can't say one way or the other. So, Wes Phillips is the son of Wade Phillips, is the son of Bum Phillips. The Phillipses have had phenomenal coaching careers. So there is that. I don't think coaching is genetic or anything like that, but Wes Phillips' exposure to football at a young age, which is the argument for basically any nepotistic hire, I guess, probably is an advantage as he kind of moves up. But I don't know anything about him potentially being an offensive coordinator. He's been a tight ends coach since like 2013 or something like that. So that's kind of who he is.
Well, we can also talk about the defensive coordinator because Ed Donatel also was hired by the Vikings.
Yeah, so he comes from that Fangio slash Staley system that everyone has been kind of um, besotted with. The one that has been like the subject of, I think, a bunch of different film breakdowns. It's a little bit of a different approach defensively. It might turn into the cover three, the way the cover three took over the NFL for a while, or the Tampa 2 before that, which are honestly very similar coverages. But there was a whole school of defenses that have been kind of emerging from this system, and obviously they've been successful for that to happen. Donatel himself, when with the Broncos, has not been remarkably successful. And I'll write a longer piece about kind of what the defense entails from a run game perspective and a pass game perspective. But I believe last year the Broncos ranked 12th in EPA allowed, and then 14th and 16th or something like that in the previous 2 years when Donatel was the defensive coordinator for the Broncos in those years. So nothing remarkably impressive. EPA can kind of be a stat that is subject to fluctuations because of big plays. So if you take a look at success rate, it actually looks even a little bit less impressive than that. So nothing there that tells you, hey, this is going to be a killer system or anything like that. But the system it emerges from is something that I think is kind of what's exciting about it, because Staley and when Raheem Morris took over the DC stuff, the Rams, they've been really successful. But of course, Staley brought a system to the Chargers, and that defense was not particularly good. So yeah, there's like a lot of kind of things here that's kind of worth investigating. Again, I'll write down a lot more, but it involves two high safeties a lot more often. We'll see a bunch of cover four, which was the predominant coverage of the Rams and the Broncos. And when the Fangio system is deployed in Chicago, which I believe it was last year, a lot of that in Chicago. So we'll see a lot of cover four. We might see a good amount of cover six. Again, I'll explain in more detail, but essentially four deep defenders, or cover six is three deep defenders, but two of them are taking half the field themselves, and then a third defender is taking up half the field by himself. And so it kind of screws up the reads a little bit for quarterbacks. There's a lot of disguise in the Staley version of the system, a lot less disguise, probably league average in terms of safety rotation in the Donatel Fangio system. But, if O'Connell says like, hey, we've got the horses to disguise a little bit better, like you had Kareem Jackson in Denver, and maybe it was kind of difficult to get him to do disguises, or maybe Justin Simmons is just such a good free safety that you didn't want to even suggest that he might be a strong safety. But we had a little bit more versatility with players like John Johnson. Staley had Derwin James in LA, or with the Chargers. We're going to try and institute a lot more of the kind of deep safety rotation that has made this system a little bit more confusing for quarterbacks. So there's the possibility that it becomes a little bit more like the Rams version. I will say this: the Rams have a great defense and have had a very good defense for the last 3 years. They also have Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, and they've found ways to create production off the edge with, initially Robert Quinn, and then Leonard Floyd, and then they got Von Miller. Even the other defensive tackles, like Greg Gaines is a phenomenal run stopper. Before that, they had Michael Brockers. Like they have a really good defensive front. They had Jalen Ramsey. Troy Hill had a really phenomenal year 2 years ago for them. Just like some pretty good corners, some really underrated safeties like John Johnson, and then Jordan Fuller, and they have really good players, is what I'm saying. And so that defense playing well is not a huge shock, and it might just be, maybe it's not the system, maybe it's just how good the players are, because the Chargers didn't have a great defense and they run the system. And the Broncos have had basically average defenses and they run the system, and some of their players aren't bad. I think what's going to kind of define the success of the system, potentially, and this is just speculation, I think is the quality of the defensive tackles, because it puts so much on the defensive tackles in order to kind of lighten the load at linebacker, that I think with a pair of bad defensive tackles like they had at the Chargers, are going to tank you, or with a pair of okay offensive tackles like they have in Denver, and they've had in Denver for the past 3 years. And, I like Mike Purcell and I like Shelby Harris, and some of the players that they've had. But they're basically above average or average players. So I think that that's going to be the concern for the Vikings, is that that defensive tackle group might define how good that defense is.
There's a lot of talk about 3-4 and 4-3, and we'll get to some of that in the mailbag, but it seems like the winds of change are coming.
Yeah, the Vikings haven't run a 3-4 since like a brief moment in the 80s. And they quickly switched, I think, that season to a 4-3. I think the Hall of Famer Chris Dolman was an outside linebacker, switched to defensive end. And so really only played like 1 year. Maybe it was a 2-year system change for the Vikings. But otherwise, they've had they've had a forefront lineman group basically the entire history of the Vikings. So it's going to be kind of interesting. That said, O'Connell basically confirmed that we're going to be running a 3-4, but that was going to be in base defense, and you don't run base defense that often. You're going to be a nickel, and that's going to be a 2-4 nickel. They're probably going to take the nose tackle off the field and rush with your 2 defensive ends at defensive tackle and your 2 outside linebackers at defensive end in the forefront. So yeah, it's going to be a 3-4, and we'll talk about it in more detail, but you're primarily going to see 4 defenders at the line of scrimmage unless there's a blitz, is what you're most likely going to see most often.
Well, the other talk of Vikings Twitter and your pieces specifically involved a lot of discussion about how the Vikings are going to get under the cap. And some of this ties directly to Cousins, some of it doesn't, but what were some of the things that you were discovering as you were looking at this?
Yeah, if we just kind of take a look at the way the Vikings would have to get under the cap, like what a blueprint looks like, essentially, they have to primarily deal with Cousins. But if we just kind of assume, right, let's say they figure out the Cousins stuff and they clear $15 million off the cap, which I think would be a pretty reasonable extension for Kirk Cousins, is finding a way to get $15 million out from under the cap. That doesn't mean Cousins makes $15 million less. In fact, it very likely means he makes a ton of money in year 1, but the cap accounting of it will be stretched over the next couple of years. And so you could clear $15 million with an extension. That puts the Vikings dead even with the cap. They have $7 million of dead cap space, plus another $10 million in void years with Anthony Barr. Which, if they re-sign Anthony Barr, which is a fair implication based off of what O'Connell said in his presser about being excited about Anthony Barr, those void years can be essentially reworked and spread out, and so you don't have to worry about it. But for now, that's $17 million just on the cap that is unmovable. You can't do anything about it. But with the Cousins extension, you can, for the total cap accounting, get to about 0. So you're going to have to clear out more space, and a lot of that, and there's a bunch of needs that the Vikings have, which we'll go over really quickly. But a lot of that is probably going to come from a Danielle Hunter extension. His cap hit in 2022 is $26 million. That is going to be untenable for the Vikings. That might require an extension of some sort. I think it probably will. I think that kind of extension is possible to even get it to cut in half for year 1 of the extension. I don't know that that's likely, but I think that it is possible to get it down by $13 million. And then if you kind of work on some of these other contracts, the Thielen contract, the Kendricks contract, the Harrison Smith contract, which Kendricks and Smith both have a $13 million cap hit. Thielen is 17. And maybe, but I doubt it, Dalvin Cook or Michael Pierce. I don't think that those are really on the table, but maybe you can begin to clear out a little bit more cap space to the point where you can get at least 30 under the cap without losing any of those players, and then you can sign back some of those players. So it is possible to get under the cap, but it's going to require a lot of negotiation, a bunch of people talking to a bunch of players, or rather the players' agents, all at once, and trying to get everything kind of aligned. One issue with the cap, of course, is not just that you have to get under, right? But you also have to save some space for the draft class, which is going to consume a significant amount of the cap, and also just for any midseason, exigencies that you have to account for. Dalvin Cook went down, let's sign a running back or whatever, right? So that's going to have to be accounted for in cap space as well. And then after that, you don't have a ton of room unless you're clearing out, unless you're out from under from like 30 or or 45, not 15. So that's the issue, is that you also have a draft class and stuff to account for.
At least the comments for this particular article were not heinous or not horrendous.
Yeah, no, they definitely did not attack my personal character. As far as I can tell, I stopped reading after like comment 100.
Because the Cousins piece was...
Yeah, like 400 Well, it depends on which Cousins piece, but there was two. One on Stafford and Cousins and one on Cousins and Cousins. And the Cousins one got like 450 comments or something like that. Yeah, I was done. I'm like, good. I'm glad you're all having a good time.
Yeah, like you guys have become your own ecosystem here.
Yeah, exactly.
Kudos. The Stafford thing I wanted to bring up just because of how controversial that turned into.
Yeah, I don't really I'm not going to say it surprised me. It absolutely is something I expected, right? Like I expected people to not love it or people to love it and for that to cause a lot of discussion. But I honestly don't think it's that weird of a take because it's not, the question is not who's a better quarterback between Stafford and Cousins. Because I posited in the piece that essentially they're equally skilled. Right. I think I used the phrase equally talented and someone took umbrage with that because they were like, well, I mean, Stafford's more talented, but that doesn't really matter. And I was like, what? For the purposes of playing quarterback, they both get the same job done. Right. Like talented is what I like. Yeah, maybe Stafford has more physical skill. That's not obviously what I was talking about. But yeah, equally skilled quarterbacks in terms of how you would rank quarterbacks and their ability to win you an average game against an average team. Fine. That, some people don't really think very much of Stafford. So I think that, they weren't going to agree with that. But I think that for the most part, a lot of people are okay with that idea. They might think that Cousins is a little bit better for a bunch of reasons that are fair. But, essentially you could put them in the same tier, especially after this year. Right. My argument was essentially that is kind of not really the question the NFL asks of quarterbacks, because the NFL then pits you against the best quarterbacks, right? And generally speaking, better defenses. But really the point is that you have to keep up with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, right? Which, maybe next year you don't have Tom Brady, maybe Aaron Rodgers gets traded to the Broncos and the NFC is just like Matthew Stafford and Kyler Murray, right? Like maybe it's fine. But for the most part, you will have to find ways to keep up with Mahomes and Allen and Rodgers and so on. And, if Russell Wilson finds a way to get his groove back, that guy too, right? Maybe Dak Prescott's as good as people say. And if that's the case, it doesn't matter how good you are at keeping up against an average quarterback. Cousins probably does that with a little bit more consistency than Stafford. But if they both get you on the same team, the same amount of wins, and then you get into the postseason, you no longer have the luxury of being a top 8, top 10 quarterback playing against, on average, the 16th or 17th best quarterback, right? On average, that's going to get you more wins, obviously. But now you're up against the best, the second best, the fourth best, etc. You're against quarterbacks that are generally better than you. So how do you play against quarterbacks that are better than you? And I know obviously that you're playing opposing defenses, you're not playing quarterbacks, but the point is you win games by scoring more points than the other team, and how many points the other team scores is dictated by what their quarterback does. And so I generally do not like the language of this quarterback against this quarterback, because that's not really how the game is played. But in terms of what your quarterback can accomplish for you, it will always be framed against what the other quarterback could accomplish for them, right? And generally speaking, the fourth best or second best quarterback in the NFL will do more to get done for themselves than the 10th best quarterback will. And so you need a quarterback that on any given day is going to either play like the 20th best quarterback in the NFL or like the best quarterback in the NFL. And so you need a volatile quarterback. You need somebody who takes chances, and when they work out, looks like a genius, and when they don't work out, looks like a dummy. And that feels like Stafford, right? And so if they're equally skilled, you want the guy that at some point can maybe hit the second or third best quarterback in the NFL in terms of total game performance. And Cousins is going to stay as your 10th best quarterback. That's who he is. And now you've got a 10th best quarterback against a second best or third best quarterback, and you always lose if the 10th best quarterback stays 10th best. So that's the premise of the piece, is you need a guy that at moments is going to be the third best quarterback in a game, right? The third best quarterback in the NFL for the game, right? And that's why Stafford is a little bit better of a playoff quarterback than Cousins. Because, yeah, he might get you bounced a little bit more because of a pick six, but he's going to get you there a little bit more too. And that's what the Rams got. They got him there.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is going to be from Wes, who asks, in listening to O'Connell's press conference, he sounded smart and rational, but no more impressive than most new coaches. As a cynical Vikings fan, I heard platitudes and slogans. Did I miss something? What specifically did he say that provides optimism going forward?
I think that's fair. I think that there's like a lot of, whenever we see a new head coach, we see a lot of praise for how, they handle the press conference and the things that they said in the press conference. And if they fumble the press conference, I think that ends up getting pointed to as a reason that, they're authentic and they're not media polished and they didn't, talk their way into the position. It's all grit, right? You can always spin a new head coach as pretty positive. The few instances where it's not, like say Adam Gase, are kind of like obvious, right? So the vast majority of new football head coach press conferences end up receiving, an injection of optimism. And I think that your kind of skepticism of that is well-founded. What did he say in the presser that, makes me think that, this is kind of an interesting direction or a good direction for the Vikings going? I think one is kind of the primacy of the passing game, which not a lot of coaches will commit to. He did talk about why it is important to be able to run the ball. He talked about how good Dalvin Cook is and how important it is to be able to get some of those difficult to get running yards, and that the Vikings will have to improve the running game. Like, I think that that's fine. He did mention that. The second thing is the way he and also and what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said a week prior is their discussion of analytics is very much in tune with somebody who understands the importance of process. If you take, for example, there's a spectrum, right? So if you take a look at, say, what Mike Vrabel said in Tennessee, he's done a very good job in Tennessee. But if you take what Mike Vrabel said, and he basically said, I'll use analytics when they agree with me. Like, what? That doesn't add anything then. It doesn't improve your process at all. Two, I think might be at the other end of the spectrum, but to what Stefanski with the Browns said, or more importantly, what Andrew Berry with the Browns said in terms of the importance that they place on it, or what Chip Kelly in Philadelphia said. This is more closer to that end, where their understanding, like they use the phrase that analytics is a tool, but they very much committed to an understanding of data as part of a process, as something that is more of a way of thinking than it is, running a model and then just deciding to do what the model says. I think that nobody would like that. I don't think even analytics nerds like that, except when pushed to extremes and shortening their takes for Twitter. But I think that for the most part, it's just a question of finding ways to see why something is true and if it's true. And if we find a surprising result when we run a model or we take a look at data, why it's surprising. It could be a problem with the model. It could be a problem with the data. It could be a problem with measurement, which sounds like a problem with data, but it's really kind of this other third thing. But it could be a problem with any of those things, or it could be a problem with your preconceptions, right? And so if you take a look at all of the other issues that could be informing why this is a surprise, and you can, if it kind of runs cleanly, no matter how you slice and dice the data, no matter how much you account for situations or account for outliers, or basically all the messy football reasons that models might not necessarily work, and it still comes to this broad conclusion, maybe that's when you begin to kind of change your approach. And it very much seems like the way that they have approached this question is very much in line with analytical thinking, which I think is much more important than running data and doing what the data says, because there's so many instances because I've been covering analytics in football since I started covering football. It's basically been something that has been core to the way that I talk about football for the past decade, and the way that it's kind of evolved. So many of the analytical insights that have been generated by a third party analytics community um, have been proven either inconsistent or wrong, or have been undermined, right, in a really significant way. Because as we begin to understand more about why the data says what it says, the more we understand that maybe the coach is doing this for a particular reason, right? Some of that's not true, and that's the stuff that we're loudest about, right? Throwing the ball a lot more often, play action a little bit more often, going for on fourth down much more often. That's still something that has been consistent as we continue to account for situational factors. But a lot of the stuff hasn't been, right. Like, we no longer, have the ability to feel comfortable giving individual defensive players expected points added per play based off of like a tackle that they made or a pass deflection that they made. Is just a very incomplete understanding of the way that defensive players work. And that was, for a very small period of time, something that was in vogue in the nascent analytics community. That's not something we do anymore, right? So the important thing is not to trust the data blindly. It's to think about the data in a way that's scientific and process oriented, and skeptical of both analytics and the football reasoning that contradicts it in the cases where they contradict each other. And that is the sense I'm getting based off of those two pressers. And that excites me a lot, because I think it's a much more competent approach to any kind of problem solving, because it recognizes the inherent instability of data, but it also recognizes that this is how we've always done it is a bad argument. So that's what I like. I think there's a bunch of other things. I think that he's really smart about football. I think the way that he talks about football is intuitive in a lot of ways that are good. And obviously the confidence that he has is great, and that's important to have. The behind the scenes stuff about kind of how much more comfortable people are with the way that he runs things, that's all good. So yeah, there's a couple of things, but I think most of the stuff that he said in the presser is pretty bog standard and not stuff that we should necessarily be excited about.
All right, next question is going to be from Iowa Josh, who asks, doesn't keeping a decent quarterback let us evaluate the coach more than going directly for the tank? Why doesn't anyone else think that this is important?
Because usually get rid of a coach after a year. It's pretty rare, and most of the time it's pretty justified. Like, I don't think anyone would point to the Urban Meyer situation and say, yeah, that's representative of what happens when a head coaching situation goes wrong. No, that's wild. Like, what Urban Meyer did was crazy. That's not the norm for a failed coaching experiment. You had a couple of one and dones in Cleveland, but for the most part, you don't have 1 year coaches. So why do you need to evaluate the coach in year one? Especially because all you have to do is adjust your expectations, right? Like, you don't need to create a perfect situation to evaluate how somebody does. You just have to account for the ways the situation is imperfect. And if you take away a quarterback for a coach, you can say, hey, they went 2-14. That makes sense. They don't have a quarterback. Now, it's pretty unlikely that any coach gets 0 or 1 wins and is still a good coach regardless of situation, but it's not impossible, right? Like, I still believe in Dan Campbell, right? But for the most part, it's hard to lose a lot of games if you're trying to win. And also, you can adjust for these things. So that I don't think it is important in year one, because, unless you've got a Freddie Kitchen scenario, who cares? If you've got faith in this guy, give him a 3-year runway. And if neither the front office nor this guy can find a quarterback, you figure out why that is. And if it's because they're not good at developing or identifying quarterback talent, move on. If it's because of, hey, these things happen, get a quarterback. Like, that doesn't bother me at all.
Well, let's go to the next question, which is from Bill Botke, who asks, let's suppose the Vikings trade Kirk Cousins for draft picks. What free agent QB makes the most sense for 2022, given their cap situation, the match with Kevin O'Connell, the offensive players like Cook, Jefferson, Thielen, and Irv Smith? Should we assume 2022 is a rebuilding year? Or could the Vikings do enough with the extra money to make the playoffs?
All right, so here are the unretired free agent quarterbacks in this year's free agent class. in order of how much they were paid in their previous contract by average. Teddy Bridgewater, the highest paid quarterback of this free agent class. Andy Dalton, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Cam Newton, Tyrod Taylor, Jameis Winston. Sorry, it's Tyrod Taylor now, I think. Jameis Winston, Jacoby Brissett, Marcus Mariota, Joe Flacco, Mitchell Trubisky, Tim Boyle. Like, those are the guys. Like, there's like 80 other quarterbacks, right? But those are the guys, right? And Tim Boyle was mostly thrown in there as a joke. None of those quarterbacks are like quarterbacks that you can use to win games, right? Like, as much as I love Teddy, sorry, we're past that. In terms of makes the most sense, it would necessarily be a rebuilding year. Now, if you like a quarterback in this year's draft class, let's say you're really in on Desmond Ridder, and I think that there's some reasons to really like him, or you're really in on like Malik Willis's upside or whatever, but you also feel like the quarterbacks in this class, and I think that this is generally the case for this year's quarterbacks, would need, if they're going to be good, would need probably a year on the bench. Then you could get a quarterback that might have the traits of somebody that you think would be good to kind of guide that person. So Teddy Bridgewater, I think, would be a really great one. Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think, would be a really great one from that perspective. And they're going to win you some games, especially Ryan Fitzpatrick. You know, I was talking about the volatility stuff with Stafford. That's Ryan Fitzpatrick, right? Tyrod Taylor is probably a really good example of a quarterback that does that. I don't know if that's really the case for somebody like, Jameis Winston, maybe not. Cam Newton, I could see it either way. Maybe Andy Dalton, but in terms of like people that can tell you how to study the game, that can instill good practice habits, that can provide examples of what good leadership looks like. I think Teddy, Fitz, Tyrod Taylor, those are really good examples of that. Maybe Joe Flacco, but if your goal is to win at least some of those games, I wouldn't really go for that. And maybe Cam Newton, I could be convinced of that, but I don't really see it necessarily for Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston. So if you're looking for a bridge quarterback, those would be the kind of the guys that I'm looking for. But it would be kind of a rebuilding year. But all the quarterback discussion that's happening this offseason, it's about trades, right? It's about whether or not Kyler Murray is going to get traded, whether or not Aaron Rodgers is going to get traded, whether or not Russell Wilson is going to get traded. Like, no one is saying, hey, I think that we could run it back with Ben Roethlisberger, and also we could convince him to play football, even though he very clearly did not want to play football for most of the games anyone watched him play football in.
Well, let's go to the next question, and that's going to be from All20Q, who asks, given that 3/4 of the NFC North is likely running some form of the Shanahan offense, are there any defensive tendencies you might expect defenses in the division to adopt?
So what's kind of interesting is that the best, maybe best is might be the wrong word, but the defense that seems most situated to stop these Rams style offenses, these McVay and Shanahan style offenses, are the Rams defenses, right? The Staley style, Fangio style defenses. In fact, that was the idea. The whole reason that McVay pursued Brandon Staley was because in 2018, the Bears just took it to the Rams, and it stuck in McVay's mind. He was dissembled by it. He was like, shook by what Fangio did to him and his Rams. And so he's like, well, I got to get that defense. And obviously he didn't get Fangio, but he asked Fangio like who he should get. And Brandon Staley at the time had been running basically the Fangio defense at, I want to say, the Division II level, and had been studying it for years and years and years, and had become a pretty good expert in it, relatively speaking. And so when he interviewed Staley, they talked about that defense. That was the reason that marriage had happened. So it's the defense that makes sure that you find answers to A, zone running, and B, a pass-first offense, right? And a pass-first offense that really likes some of these particular routes, really likes to stress the deep safety, for example, really likes to find ways to create conflict in the deep zones. you find ways to get your linebackers to get deeper in coverage. You find ways to make sure that your defense has answers for what happens deep downfield, which is why there's so much quarters in cover six. That's why those linebackers are not as involved in the run game. It's why your front for stopping the run is essentially 5 players until the safeties get in gear and get downhill, right? Those are the styles of defenses that counter what the Rams do. Now, Shanahan is a little bit different because that is a bit more of a run-first offense. And they still have to find ways to stop the outside zone. And there are some intricacies that are different between the Shanahan and McVay styles of outside zone that make it a little bit difficult, particularly for, play side defenders on like the end of the line of scrimmage, right? And, that's a particularly you have to account for. But generally speaking, these giant beefy nose tackles that have become in vogue are, or that are coming back into vogue, I should say, after having like this, renaissance in the 80s and a little bit in the 90s, are a really good way to stop it because it really kills the hinge or pivot point of these zones and creates a lot of backside pursuit opportunities, right? Which is what Belichick did against the Rams in the Super Bowl. So that is going to be kind of what helps stop this sort of thing. And that's kind of what the Vikings employ now. I imagine, that the Bears are going in that direction. I'm kind of curious as to what kind of the Lions will do about it. The Packers have not gone in that direction, but teams that pay particular attention to deep conflicts and find ways to craft coverage rules that account for those conflicts and find ways to pay particular attention to the passing game will, I think, be more successful. But those coordinators are getting snapped up by the very offenses that run them.
So we're going to get a couple of the 3-4 questions in kind of all at once here. So Stizo asks, how do the defensive players drafted last year fit into the new scheme moving into the 3-4 base? Kevin Mellick asks, hey guys, love your opinion on what our defense will look like next year and how our players will kind of change positions to accommodate the new look. And Jay Nord asks, kind of a longer one, but good question. I have a football-based question for the football podcast. That actually seems odd sometimes. I'm reading the Wickersham book, Better to be Feared, about the Patriots, and something that stands out to me is that the reason why New England went to 3-4 in the early Belichick years is that it was cheaper to find good players who could execute it since teams predominantly ran a 4-3. Can the Vikings benefit from this today, or was it simply a market inequality that has since been corrected?
Yeah, so a lot of interesting questions about a switch to a 3-4. Primarily, of course, there'll be a nickel, and that's going to look pretty similar, except maybe your edge rushers will be standing up instead of having their hand in the dirt. As for the first question about players drafted last year, the rookies from last year, really the only 3 that you probably have to worry about, maybe 4, are Patrick Jones, edge rusher, Janarius Robinson, edge rusher, and Jalen Twyman, defensive tackle. You might have to worry about linebacker Chassaret. But the back end stuff like Cameron Bynum, a switch to a 3-4 doesn't matter. Now, maybe the coverage stuff might matter, but I think actually that cover 4 style system is probably actually fairly well suited for him. So I don't think that that's going to be a huge issue. But if you're asking about those players, I think that it's kind of interesting that they drafted Jones and Robinson because they are on the heavier side of what an outside linebacker would look, around 265 or so. Zimmer ended up trending lighter and lighter in terms of the defensive ends that he would draft. Initially, they were guys that when they weighed in at the combine were 270, 280. You're like Carlos Dunlap is a good example, but I mean, Everson Griffin, I think, did the combine at 270, right? Brian Robinson did it at like 270. Those guys aren't Zimmer guys. They were drafted before Zimmer, but, they were in the style that Zimmer would draft. And that's what we found in Cincinnati. And that's what we found in the first couple of years. Scott Crichton is kind of a decent example as well. But, Daniil Hunter was 255, I think, at the combine. And then they kind of were comfortable going a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter. I think DJ Wanham is another good example. I'll check that real quick. DJ Wanham was 258, right? So instead of being 270, 280, 258. Now Patrick Jones and Janarius Robinson are a little bit in the other direction, 265, 268, but, and maybe it means nothing, but that would be kind of not incredible in terms of the fit as a 3-4 outside linebacker, but I don't anticipate particular problems. And if I was going to say that one should be a base end, as in the 5 technique that very often gets tagged as a defensive tackle, and I think rightly so, it would probably be Patrick Jones. But I don't think really either of them are best fit there. So it could be maybe a poor fit, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. The bigger issue for me is I just don't really think that they were tantalizing enough prospects that you should commit yourself to them or DJ Wanham as the edge rusher opposite Danielle Hunter. I think that the Vikings should really go out and pursue that guy. So that's what I think about that. I think Jalen Twyman would fit the role of a pass rushing defensive tackle. So that doesn't change anything for me, assuming that Twyman actually kept up with his nutrition and exercise schedule to be along the lines of a 3 technique rather than a nose tackle. He's a 3 technique at Pitt, and then kind of grew in size to be a nose tackle, and not because he's like lazy or anything like that, but took a regimen that was really geared more towards building muscle and strength than it was for developing quickness, which is why he had a pro day that was very much more like a nose tackle's pro day. And the Vikings, when they drafted him, said, hey, you're going to have to shape your body to be like a 3 technique. Now, I think that is something that fits well in a 3-4, because typically one of your defensive ends will kind of sit and be a base end, at least in a very modern 3-4, not in the 80s style 3-4s or even the 90s style 3-4s. But one of them will still be kind of a pass rusher, and one of them will be kind of a run plugger, and they can kind of switch. And the nose tackle kind of, depending on how you run the 3-4, will very often be on the side of the guy that's on an inside shoulder rather than head up. And so the nose tackle can help with run defense with that penetrator. That's the role that J.J. Watt played in the Phillips defense in Houston before they kicked him back outside. So I think that Twyman, as he's projected, would fit in that role. As for the rest of that Vikings defense, I actually think that there have been a lot of discussions about the Vikings potentially playing a 3-4. This is the most 3-4 looking Vikings team that we have seen, I think, in a very long time. And it just so happens to be at a time when they might be able to switch to 3-4. So Dalvin Tomlinson has played both nose tackle and base defensive end, both in the NFL and in college for Alabama, and, in the NFL for the New York Giants as a 3-4 defensive end. And I think he's better suited to that than he is as a 3 technique, which is what the Vikings projected him at in the Zimmer era, which I didn't think was a great move. Now, in the Vikings' defense, or in Zimmer's defense, Tomlinson was pretty decent at the thing that they thought he was good at, right, which was stopping the run, but I don't know that it helped the Vikings. And as a 3-4 end, I think that he's fine there. Michael Pierce is very much a classic big 0 technique style nose tackle. He did it a ton in Baltimore, one of the only other few teams to actually run a 3-4. So that's a pretty good fit there. Now, I don't know that they have a backup nose tackle, so they're going to have to find that guy in much the same way the Rams found Greg Gaines, then eventually worked his way into becoming a starter. But Armon Watts, for example, I see much more as a 3-4 end than I see as a nose tackle. But that I think is going to be available for you in this year's draft. I think that you can find that guy pretty late because this is a weirdly good nose tackle draft. So I think you're going to be able to find some guys later on that'll fit that role. So that's kind of how I see that defense, kind of moving forward. You just need to find somebody opposite to Danielle Hunter, who, by the way, was projected initially in the draft to be a 3-4 outside linebacker before the Vikings drafted him and made him a defensive end, which is his role either way. I think that he's probably fine in that role. Now, you don't want him dropping into coverage a ton, but he did drop into coverage for the Vikings a decent amount. And here's the stuff that people don't really seem to like to hear, but he was not bad at it. More importantly, the plays that he did it weren't really bad plays for the Vikings more often than not, because it creates coverage confusion. And so sometimes you just want to do that, even though that's not the thing that Danielle Hunter is best at. You will still have him rushing the passer 95% of the time, so that's not an issue. The thing is, the other outside linebacker, you're probably going to want to have a little bit more versatility, which is why I think they need to find that guy rather than figure out whether or not Patrick Jones or DJ Wanham or Tashawn Bauer, who's on the roster again, or Janarius Robinson can do it. Also, James Lynch, for example, was a 3-4 end. I think he can just play that role again, even though he added weight to be a nose tackle. He added weight to be a 4-3 nose tackle, which can be a 3-4 defensive end, not a necessarily a 3-4 nose tackle. So there are a lot of 3-4-ish players here. So yeah, I think you just need to find that other outside linebacker. It could be Anthony Barr if they re-sign him, if they find a way to re-sign him. And the thing about re-signing Anthony Barr is that I think, based off of the rules of the way these contracts work, is the only way you can deal with the $10 million in dead cap that he incurs. And so it is like one of the few, it's the only free re-signing I think the Vikings basically have. So if they get him back in that 3-4 outside linebacker role, I think that you've got a pretty decent 3-4 system. So yeah, and Eric Hendricks, I think, I think he'd thrive anywhere. I did write him up as the potential cap casualty for the Vikings in the Athletics All 32 cap casualties piece. I don't think he is one. I just needed to pick one, and I said, hey, every player that's a big cap hit for the Vikings is probably going to stay with the Vikings under a reworked contract. But if you take a look at what the Rams have done historically, or you take a look at what these defenses have done historically, they have de-emphasized the linebacker position. Like the star of the game for the Rams in the Super Bowl was Ernest Jones, right? Like it's not this high paid first round pick linebacker. So that could be an area, but I think honestly, Kendricks is just going to be good at whatever he does. So I don't think that there's any significant problem with the way the Vikings are constructed. It's just this interesting coincidence that they happen to have the most 3-4 capable team that they've had in the past decade and a half, if not longer, that, really helps. Then in terms of, can the Vikings benefit from a market inefficiency of the lack of 3-4 players? I think so a little bit, but because these schemes have like kind of coalesced in general anyway, there's just, it's not like early on in the Belichick years where you really did have 3-4 players. Like they're really very similar schemes. So it might be that an edge rusher who's only okay at rushing the passer and only okay at pass coverage might be that market inefficiency, right? But these big nose tackles are still going to be favored, right? The 3-4 end style stuff, maybe that's going to be a little bit more available than it usually is. Maybe it's going to make it easier for the Vikings to draft some of these Alabama linemen. But people have been taking 3-4 ends at college and putting them at 3 technique a lot. So I don't know that edge exists anymore, but it might at the margins. So I think that answers every one of those 3 questions.
All right, let's go to Kenneth Allen, who asks, now that every team's coaching staff has been set, which teams do you think got the best head coaches and which got the best overall staffs? I wonder how far these come apart from the Vikings specifically, as I'm very whelmed by these assistant coaches.
I'm not going to power rank the staffs. I will talk about the head coaches a little bit. The staffs, I think the one staff that stands out to me, so it's going to be a power ranking of just one team, but the staff that I like the most out of all of them is probably the New York Giants staff, which, is probably surprising because it's not like, they've been a font of a bunch of coaching, but obviously they got head coach Brian Daboll, which I think a lot of people, including me, were interested in as a head coach. Great, fantastic. But in terms of staffs, I think getting Mike Kafka as your offensive coordinator, really fantastic. People have been talking about him forever as a future offensive coordinator. Like ever since he retired, essentially, like 2012 or something like that. He retired from the Eagles in 2012. He retired in general in 2015. He's been talked about as a coaching mind. He is 1 year older than me, and he is like this exciting new young coach. He's been, I think, the quarterback's coach for the Chiefs since 2018, I want to say, which bang up job, my dude. Fantastic work. And then he became the passing game coordinator for the Chiefs the last 2 years. So I really like kind of what Kafka brings. Not going to make any Kafka jokes. Quarterbacks coach Shea Tierney, I don't know a ton about him, but he was the assistant quarterbacks coach for the Bills the last 2 years. Great. Doesn't look like that was a problem. Brian Daboll obviously liked him enough to bring him on. Running backs coach DeAndre Smith. Now, I've heard good things about him. He was on the University of North Carolina staff in 2017 when they had all those great running backs. He was on the Texas Tech staff the last 2 years. I don't know much about kind of the running backs he's generally produced, but my understanding is that he's very well he's got a good reputation in that category. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Wide receivers coach Mike Groh, I think, is a home run for them. The 1 year that the Eagles had good receivers, he was the wide receivers coach. 2017, he actually got something out of Nelson Aguilar. But he has been kind of well considered to be a good wide receivers coach for a while. He followed Frank Reich to Indianapolis, and they've had really good wide receiver development. So I think that they did a really good job getting wide receivers coach. I don't know anything about their tight ends coach. Offensive line coach Bobby Johnson has a really good reputation. He's been with the Bills the last 2 years, and he hasn't been an offensive line coach for a very long time. But based off of kind of putting your ear to the ground, I think that that's somebody that people have talked about a lot as somebody who's very good. They got Wink Martindale, who I still don't know why the Ravens fired, but I think that he is a really phenomenal, defensive coordinator. So I think that they, got away with some crimes there to get him. And then they also have Vikings defensive line coach Andre Patterson. I don't need to talk about him. Everybody knows he's good. But what's crazy is they also got assistant defensive line coach Brian Cox. If you remember him from Hard Knocks for the Atlanta Falcons, it is wild to me that he's an assistant defensive line coach. I think that he's a really, really good DL coach. And it turns out he's the assistant defensive line coach here. So I think that that's kind of a home run for them. I know either outside linebackers coach Drew Wilkins. He's been a really great outside linebackers coach for the Ravens for the past 4 or 5 years. They've gotten a lot of production out of that position. I don't know anything about their inside linebackers coach. I don't know anything really about their defensive backs coach. Looks like he was with the Falcons the past 4 or 5 years. That doesn't seem all that great to me. And then I don't know anything about, these coaches further down the list. But I think for the most part, that coaching staff is really, really, really phenomenal. Now, in terms of the best head coaches, again, I've got no idea kind of who the best head coaches will be. But I think that Brian Daboll might be the best head coach hire out of all of them. So I guess I'd put that at number one. I think the Dennis Allen hire for the Saints is up there. So that could be, number 2 or 3. I think probably Kevin O'Connell is up there, number 2 or 3. Mike McDaniel, I think, is probably in that 2, 3, 4 range as well. So I just create a tier there and say Mike McDaniel, Kevin O'Connell, and Dennis Allen for the Saints. Allen has just done such a great job crafting defenses and just generally being a good coach. Not just in terms of his schematic ability as a defensive mind, but just being a good coach. I think that that's good. After that, I'd probably go Doug Peterson for the Jaguars. And it's just shocking to me that after all that happened with the Jaguars and their inability to find coaches and their inability to bring coaches to the building for interviews and all of the stuff, right? Like with the Trent Baalke stuff, they ended up with a pretty reasonable coach. I would say Doug Peterson is probably next to me. Obviously, the politicking and the commitment to wins and stuff like that in Philadelphia didn't work out, but he won a Super Bowl, right? It wasn't all bad. Nathaniel Hackett, I guess, probably after that for the Broncos. That doesn't strike me as a bad hire. I'd probably put him and Josh McDaniels maybe in the same category. And the only reason Josh McDaniels is in that category is just because I think he's probably learned a little bit since his time in Denver. And I don't think that he's got, all the control in the world for the Raiders roster. Like they brought in, I think, Dave Ziegler as the general manager, which great. He's another New England guy, but I think that means Josh McDaniels has a little bit less control. And that was, I think, the biggest issue with his tenure in Denver. Obviously, there's a bunch of issues, but I think that he's probably learned a little bit, and he is such a good offensive mind that he might be able to make up for how much people dislike him, which I think is fair. I mean, the way that he left the Colts at the Ultra was pretty bad, but in terms of his ability to be a high-performance head coach, it's possibly there. So that's why he and what's his name? Doug Peterson, right? Or Nathaniel Hackett, that's it. Nathaniel Hackett are at the same level. And then Lovie Smith, which I actually don't think was a bad hire either, given everything. Like, I think, Lovie Smith has had some success. He did well at Illinois, but he didn't do super well at Illinois. I don't know. That one's kind of weird. But
that one's weird for a number of reasons, not the least of which being the NFL is having a race scandal as far as coaching is concerned.
Right.
And the Texans are the one to save the day on it.
That's so bizarre. I mean, they did dismiss one of the only 3 black head coaches in the NFL after 1 year in David Culley. Of course, the Dolphins are the other one. The fact that they ended up with coaches who are people of color is notable. But it's there, and Lovie Smith is, of all the things that, like, in the same way that the Jaguars were scrambling, the way the Texans were scrambling, I didn't think that they would be able to end up with a coach that seems fine, and he seems fine. I don't know that there's a hire here that strikes me as obviously bad. But the Lovie Smith one, I think that it's probable that he doesn't have the goods anymore in terms of the ability to coach. But you could say that just as easily about Josh McDaniels, who has a worse win percentage as a head coach than Lovie Smith.
Yeah. Let's go to Ryan, who asks, Vikings coaching staff seem to be based around the scheme du jour in the NFL. Based on the cyclical nature of these, are they getting in on the next big wave, or will they be caught by the NFL's constant evolution?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I think that that's a pretty big risk. Maybe not this year, but in the next couple of years following. I don't know. Like when you take a look at defensive trends, they appear and disappear a little bit faster, like the cover 3. But I think offensively they tend to stick around just a little bit longer. I mean, like Shanahan was doing this stuff in like 2016, right? And it has stayed relatively successful. I should say Shanahan was doing it at a high level in 2016. He's been doing it forever, but he's been doing it at a high level in 2016 when he made Matt Ryan an MVP. And since then, it's just been kind of a thing that people want. So I think that the offensive side of it lasts a little bit longer, but I think that it's pretty fair to say, hey, this could be running out soon. It's just difficult to say it in the year right after the two of the coaches running the scheme made the Super Bowl, right? Like, so it's difficult to figure out when that would be, but I think that that's a legitimate concern. But I think the worst case scenario is like 3 years from now, not like next year.
I was just looking at a list of every Vikings head coach that they've ever had, and I've noticed a thing that, an odd pattern, if you will. I'm struggling to find a coach who was a head coach somewhere else first.
You mean the Vikings don't hire retreads, is what you're saying?
Yeah, somebody who already has head coaching experience at the pro level, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that says anything, but that's interesting.
It's an odd thing. I was just going through. I was like, that's an interesting quality to have. Zimmer, first time. Frazier, first time. Right. Childress, first time.
Yep.
Tice,
yeah.
First time. Denny Green. He was a head coach in college, but not in the pros.
Yeah. That mattered more then, too. I would count that as head coaching experience. I think that mattered more then. But, yeah, but pretty thin, though, in terms of people with head coaching experience.
I was going to say Jerry Burns is the next one, and I'm literally Googling it now to see
I do not, because he was on Bud Grant's staff forever, right? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that I'm confident, and I'm just triple checking this, as far as a head coach is concerned. Yeah, head coach of the Vikings was his first job. Yeah, and then it goes to Bud Grant. So
who was the head coach of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. there's the North Code connection. That's crazy. Luke Braun wants you to choose a side here. Luke Braun asks, most of O'Connell's hires are people he has already worked with. Is that a good thing? They know they can work together, or a bad thing? Decreased size of talent pool. Don't give me a wishy-washy, some kind of each answer. Pick a side, you coward.
So I'm going to start by saying I think that there's a good argument for either of these cases. I think there's a little bit of both involved here, because I think it is important to be able to, it's not the talent pool, although that matters. I think it's the ability to expose yourself to new ideas. It's not your openness to new ideas. Very much seems like this coaching staff is very open to new ideas, but rather your ability to encounter new ideas and then adopt them. So I think that that's important. I think that like getting Mike Pettin in as an assistant head coach, maybe that gives you kind of one contact point with somebody who before Green Bay as a defensive coordinator before Green Bay, has had a lot of success. Um, that kind of gives you that opportunity. But I think that that's a smaller downside if you've been successful, right? Like Kubiak bringing in all of the Kubiak loyalists plus his son is a little bit different because, like, what have they done? That's a little bit less interesting. These guys just won a Super Bowl after being contenders for like 3-4 years, right? So that I think is a little bit better, and I would say that for the most part, it's probably a good thing. And again, I don't know that they know that they can work together from a chemistry standpoint, but it is important that uh, the way that they coach doesn't interfere with the way that anybody else wants to coach, which is pretty related. But it's not like they're at loggerheads or anything like that. It's more that their coaching styles we know complement each other. So the players don't get mixed messages or anything like that. So I think it's better in this case. But if you haven't been winning and you don't come from an organization that values intellectual diversity, and let's be frank, other kinds of diversity as well, but if you're grabbing people that you've worked with from an organization that is stagnant, right, that's worse, right? But the Rams are not stagnant. They bring in new people all the time, including Kevin O'Connell, right? He was brought in from outside the organization. Obviously had experience with McVay in Washington, but he was brought in from outside the organization. That I think tells us that there's a good opportunity going forward that they might bring in people from outside the organization, and also that they're not stuck in kind of the loops that you get stuck into with loyalty and nepotism and stuff like that. So I think for the most part in this specific instance, it's probably a good thing.
Next question is going to be from Dr. Aaron Matson, who asks, most mock drafts have the Vikings drafting a cornerback or an edge defender. If that's the way to go, that and the players have about an equal grade, which position would you pick? Other than quarterback, what would you say the top 3 to 4 positions according to positional value are this year?
I'll answer the second question first, which will answer the first question. I think the top positions according to positional value, open having my mind changed because the NFL does disagree a little bit, are wide receiver, cornerback, safety, and then probably offensive tackle. So edge defender isn't on that list of top 4, right? I think that it is probably next, but cornerback is a little bit higher. But I think that helps answer that question. But there's 2 other elements at play here. One, how deep is the need for that position? Basically, what replacement value are you getting out of it, or value over replacement are you getting out of it? And how deep is the draft at that position? My cursory examination of the draft based on grinding the mocks data, and eventually it'll be based off of my ability to gather all these big boards, is that cornerback and edge are both fairly deep this year. So that doesn't resolve that tiebreaker. But in terms of how deep the need for the Vikings is and your value over replacement here, I trust the Vikings to probably produce a replacement level player out of one of those 3 edge defenders. Between DJ Wanham and Janarius Robinson and Patrick Jones, you might have a pretty good chance of producing somebody of value there, right? The Vikings don't just need Cameron Dantzler to perform, right? They also need to be able to re-sign Patrick Peterson. And if they don't, they need like Chris Boyd to step up, right? And then they still need a third guy after that, right? They still need, I don't know. I don't even know who's left on the roster anymore after that. Harrison Hand, who they like refuse to put on the field. So I think that tells you right there that the answer is probably cornerback, because after they draft a corner, they will still need at least one other corner, if not 2. Because Cameron Dantzler, we don't know if he's good either, right? Like, he's the one starter left, and he didn't even start this year for the Vikings until they were like, yeah, we got to get Breland out of here, right? And so he didn't win the starting job, even though he had it at the beginning of camp, right? And then he lost the starting job. And then uh, like Chris Boyd was getting like run. Like it was just like not good. And so I don't know that Cameron Dancer is going to be the answer. So you might need 3 cornerbacks. You only need 1 edge defender, right? Like obviously you need depth, but that's true at cornerback as well. But you need more bodies there. So if the Vikings didn't have an edge defender and they had 2 cornerbacks, I would say get the edge defender, right? But here they don't have any starters that I think are you could be confident in counting on. So definitely cornerback here.
From Ethan, from the grass is always greener corner, Kirk Cousins hasn't been the panacea Vikings fans hoped for since he's been signed, but in looking back, is there any plan B which would have provided better results for the Vikings? The other 3 quarterback options when Cousins was signed were Teddy Two Gloves, Sam Bradford, and Case Keenum, and they've all played worse. Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, and Josh Allen were all drafted before the Vikings draft slot, meaning the Vikings would have had to give up multiple first-round picks to trade up. While in retrospect, that would have been okay given the actual first-round draft choices, it also could have led to a Mitch Trubisky, a Sam Darnold, Deshaun Watson, or numerous other busts rather than a Justin Herbert. The other failures one can point to are talking like Mike Hughes over Lamar Jackson or Willie Beavers over Dak Prescott, but would either of those quarterbacks truly gotten the Vikings further than Cousins?
To answer the final question, yes, I think they would have. I know that Dak Prescott's gotten beat up a lot in terms of the public perception of how he plays, but his highs are higher than Cousins, for sure, easily. Lamar Jackson, yeah, man. Yeah, I think Lamar Jackson's already a better quarterback than Cousins. I mean, I don't think there's any year where you could say Cousins like deserve the MVP, and you've gotten that for Lamar Jackson. But also, he has that volatility that you're looking for in terms of if he's not the best quarterback, you're going to want that guy. And I think that both Prescott and Jackson are better than Cousins. So they, I think, on a baseline level analysis, get you there. But also, I think their highs are higher, right? And so they're more likely to take you further. So yeah, absolutely. I think, especially Lamar Jackson, but yeah, I think that they would. Beyond that, yeah, okay. So the Vikings would have to give up multiple first round picks to trade up for like Patrick Mahomes. Like, good. Like, fine, do it. Yeah, you could have busted, right? But like, busting's not bad if you bust hard, right? Like, so long as you pick the right moment to get out of it and draft a quarterback. Like if the Texans had traded DeAndre Hopkins for a first round pick instead of a second, like what the hell was going on there? They probably could have gotten a quarterback, right? Like instead of Davis Mills. So yeah, I'm fine like taking a chance on a quarterback and ending up with a bust. So long as you bust hard enough that you can get another quarterback. So yeah, I don't know. This retrospective just makes it look like the Vikings really screwed that up. And I don't blame them, right? Because they just came off an NFC Championship appearance. I think from the perspective of someone inside the Vikings organization, it makes all the sense in the world. Like I totally understand it. I was very hesitant about Kirk Cousins, the signing, and the average value that he was worth versus how much he signed. I thought he was worth about that, but I still felt weary about it. I don't know. It was a tough decision, but I get it. They were there. And you ostensibly had a better quarterback in Kirk Cousins than Case Keenum, a less volatile quarterback. But I think that first of all hadn't entered my evaluation of how quarterbacking works. But second, clearly you weren't going to get it out of Case Keenum again. So like in terms of between Teddy and Sam and Case, Cousins was the better option. And I think that given what you knew at the time, that was fine. I think that they probably did the right thing. But the retrospective stuff, like when you take a look at these quarterbacks that they could have drafted, yeah, dude, trade like 4 first round picks. Take a chance. Like you end up with Sam Darnold, you've got another chance to draft. I mean, the Jets drafted second overall. It's not my fault they drafted Zach Wilson.
Next question is from Nolan Kaler, who asks, for North Code, how will new Packers quarterback coach and former Blue Bombers quarterback Tom Clements turn Jordan Love into an even bigger threat than Favre and Rodgers combined?
Like a Voltron of Favre and Rodgers, right? Like that's like Jordan Love is composed of like Favre on the right arm and Rodgers on the unvaccinated left arm, right?
Presumably, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Vikings are screwed. I don't know how else to put it. You get a quarterbacks coach like Tom Clements, who everyone knows. Uh, yeah, it's unstoppable.
Next question's from Andrew Schuba, who asks, which Viking is most likely to collect ape NFTs?
So this is a broad term that refers to both the Bored Ape Yacht Club and all of its derivative ape NFTs, which I hope most of you thought sounded like gobbledygook. If that was incomprehensible to you, congratulations.
We
Anyway,
we
the answer,
wish you were. We wish we were you.
yeah, good job. Keep it up, whatever you're doing. Um, the answer is Justin Jefferson.
Well, it has to. It has to be because the Des Bryant was discussing NFTs with him. So yes.
Yeah, well, it's not just discussing. He said, "When are you going to drop? Are people ready for you to drop your NFT?" And Justin Jefferson's, "I don't think people are ready yet." So he's already in the NFT game. So yeah, I think it's him.
It likely has to be. Ian Pauley asks, which NFL coach would half-assedly slap an opposing coach for something as trivial as a late timeout in a blowout? Who are these two head coaches?
So James and I both came up with the answer in our head, and we both thought when we were talking to each other about this question that we'd both come to the same answer. And it took a little bit of time for us to realize we hadn't, because both of these coaches had retired. Right, like
and both were likely spending time with their families,
right,
out near Kentucky.
Right. So it was Sean Payton and Mike Zimmer. So yeah, clearly those are the two coaches that would happen to. As if like current head coaches, I'm having trouble with that. I mean, like Joe Judge is gone too. He would have been probably a good candidate. Like you probably really care about sportsmanship, right?
I could see Dan Campbell like scuffing up somebody's hair, but maybe not slapping.
It's tough. Dan Campbell just seems so happy all the time, and then when he's not happy, he is inestimably sad. But he never seems angry, right? So like I can't see Dan Campbell doing it. I just know that if he did it, someone would have their heads separated from their body.
Maybe this is the thing that gets Lovie Smith fired. Lovie Smith is now like is gotten older. He certainly looks the part with the beard. Like
I don't know, man. I can't see it with Lovey. Like it would take some serious snapping for that. Maybe Doug Peterson, I guess.
Maybe.
I can't. This one. Oh wait, no, it's Josh McDaniels. No,
okay.
he would be the one doing something that he'd be the one that slapped. Obviously, not even a question.
Yeah.
Totally forgot it. Yeah, Josh McDaniels will be slapped. The question, I guess, is by who, and I can't. It wouldn't be Andy Reid, of course. It wouldn't be. It wouldn't be Brandon Staley or Sean McVay or. I mean, Pete Carroll has the energy, but not the gumption.
Bill Belichick has the gumption, but not the energy.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, whatever it is. Josh McDaniels getting slapped.
we're on board with that.
Yeah.
Peter asks, for a Reef's parenting corner, what advice do you have for teaching kids how to have a healthy relationship with social media and avoid the negative toll it can have on mental health? I'm debating the best approach myself and want the input of someone who has avoided these negative consequences. So, Arif, how do you avoid haters on Twitter?
Yeah, something I'm very successful at doing. Yeah, advice that I take that you should take is don't engage. That only feeds them. It gives them attention. It makes them, it validates their approach. And of course, everyone knows I don't engage, right? Like I never.
You don't believe in it. Anger's up the blood.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. No, in terms of like kids and stuff, I obviously don't know the answer to this, but I would probably say limit the number of hours that they can have on social media. I think there's a bunch of apps that allow you to do that, especially with phones. I guess if they're on a computer, that's a little bit tougher because they can just log into the web app. If I don't know, people who use Twitter over the web exclusively are kind of weird, but I still use Twitter over the web just to see kind of because I've got the show me, I've got the chronological order on TweetDeck, which I have to use on game day. And then on my phone, it's largely chronological, but on the web app, I have it as like, show me the tweets I missed. So that's how I catch up. But I think that's a crazy use case. I don't think people do that. It's just usually one or the other. But yeah, it's probably just like use phone apps to limit their the number of hours per day that they can have access to social media, right? So,
Well,
which sounds draconian. I hate like telling people to limit kids, but yeah, I mean, social media is a drug. Don't give them drugs.
Yeah, but well, maybe make sure they just only find themselves in really appropriate and positive groups, like bronies or things like that never get picked on for any reason. Like that's probably your best bet, is just make sure to push them in those directions.
Yeah, get them into fan fiction, something that's totally not nerdy and everyone celebrates.
Yep, and not NSFW at all.
Yeah, not alarming from that perspective at all.
No. In fact, if you could just have them Google Rule 34 before they start.
Yeah, they need to know the rules of the internet before they get on the internet.
Exactly. Ricardo says, "Good day, sirs. The other day, my daughter corrected my wife at dinner when she referred to the Mandalorian as Boba Fett. She is 3.5, and this may have been the most proud I have ever been of her. On a scale of 1 to 10, with the 1 being a spouse who cheats at Wordle, and 10 being Alan Page, how terrible a person am I? Follow-up, does the number increase as she ages if this moment remains number 1 over things like report cards, college admissions, Nobel Prizes, etc.? Thanks and enjoy your off-season. P.S. How do we start a legal fund for Mrs. from Ohio? Seems like she deserves it."
we gotta get her out of there. GoFundMe, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you've already, unless there's something in your child's life that I don't know about that has happened that has prevented this, you've already glossed over her first steps, right? Like
that's steps that's all, and words, yeah,
and words, right? So we're in some interesting territory, is all I'm going to say. As that number does increase if the moment remains number 1. I don't know if report cards is up there, but like college admissions is up there. Nobel Prizes is certainly up there. First time your daughter stands up to a bully is up there, I think. Boy, right now, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of terrible person, this is a very funny thing to be extremely proud of. So it's not that bad, even though it skipped over those at least 2 major life events that have occurred. But so 10 is great, right? So 10 is, it's interesting because you said how terrible on a scale of 1 to 10, and I have to readjust because 1 is the awful part. I would say you're probably at a 5. Not amazing in terms of parent like pride, but also, it's funny, so it's fine. But like if we go to like the first time she sacrifices something to help a friend in need, or stands up to a bully, or gets into Stanford or whatever, wins the Nobel Prize, we're in some interesting territory. Now, if she wins the Nobel Prize for like posting, right? For like writing the best tweets, then yeah, it's just kind of a continuum. You can just be proud of the Nobel Prize because you were proud of your daughter for correcting your wife. Like that's the same pride. But if it's like for curing cancer or something, we have to talk, buddy.
Yeah, that's gonna be a priority thing. As the kid gets older, you stop looking at it like this is the proudest I've ever been, and you just end up beaming with pride. I don't have the same amount of pride the day that...
Wait, you don't keep a spreadsheet of like how proud you are of various life events?
Not... I mean, I was actually, as you were talking about it, I was sitting in there going, what's my son's proudest moments? But I couldn't rank them. Like it would... I just... I
mean, you could. You just have to invest the energy.
Even just sitting back, like him learning how to ride his bike compared to the first time I got him to like walk in our apartment hallway, which was super long, but like walk to his mom and not use the walls or anything, just this like long walk that I caught on video, and he was all walking. It was cute, and she ruined it by trying to talk and ask like where are his shoes. I was like, no, you don't understand. He's walking towards. Pay attention to the child. Anyway,
you can't rank those two events against each other.
Not particularly, no, because he worked hard on both.
My answer is very easy on this one. It's the walking and the bike.
The bike was
Bike's great. I don't want to diminish the bike.
Bike was great. He was already walking though at the same time. He just wasn't doing long distances. So like that was like a really long distance, and it was cute. And the fact that I'd kind of set it up this way and it worked or whatever, like it fine. But I've got things like that or like school stuff or whatever. But I don't really rank them as much as I would if I had multiple kids and I was trying to decide who I liked more. Like that's much more rankable, as opposed to
more rankable?
Far easier to do. Like parents say they don't have favorites. You don't really.
I won't violate the covenant by asking, but
you don't really. But there's, especially when one turns into a little troublemaker. Like it's pretty obvious. It's weird, which actually brings us to our next question. From Damien Barrett, questions for James's relationship corner. Who is better at relationships, James or Aaron Rodgers?
Well, this is your relationship corner, James, so it's up to you to answer. I know is that I can't.
I guess. Looking at the situation and what has brought us to this point, Aaron Rodgers and his now fiance, or former fiance rather, have split. Mm-hmm. And he went and made a gushy Instagram post. It was on Instagram, right? Right.
Yeah, but he also repeated the sentiment you're about to say on the Pat McAfee show.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I don't go on social media and go on a friend's show, terrestrial radio or otherwise, and start talking about how much I loved my spouse or how much I loved my ex and all the good times that we had with them. I tell occasionally hilarious stories about situations like that, but it's never about how much I loved and cared and respected about that.
Right.
That's not me.
That's down bad behavior for sure.
Yeah, that's not, no. And
it's very uncomfortable too for everyone involved.
Exactly. That's not my thing. And I'm certainly not the type who would do some long cleanse and then be like, oh my God, I love all of you. That's not me either. So
you don't know unless you've had the cleanse.
Well, I've never
sounds life-changing.
I've never done a ghee cleanse, so I guess maybe he's just working up to DMT with Joe Rogan.
Almost certainly.
It feels like this is where it's headed toward. But no, I don't do any of the sins that are happening right now from him. So I think he might actually be worse. But if you want to be technical about it, I also made it past the championship round. I made it
championship round. That's true, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I made it past the fiance stage to the wedding stage. So I've been to the big game.
Yeah, you got the big onion ring.
Yeah, this is on him now. Just throwing that out there. Also, given Arif's impassioned argument against nepotism in the NFL on the last show, how will he feel when KOC employs Dusty to a prominent role with the Vikings, albeit one that can be done from a basement or by a corpse?
I don't think Kevin O'Connell's going to kill Dusty. I don't really understand the implication of that last part of the question.
I don't understand the Dusty's dead stuff anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. He's clearly in your basement and alive.
I don't have a basement in my current place. I am the basement. This is...
So he's your roommate.
He's not a... I'm looking over at the room across the hall from me that has a big Minecraft poster in it, and I can assure you, Dusty does not sleep in that race car bed. He probably is jealous of the race car bed, but he does not sleep in the race car bed.
Right. That's because you don't let him sleep. He just happens to have a race car bed, which taunts him every day.
Actually, that's a really good idea. I need to write that one down. But the question is, how will you feel when Kevin O'Connell employs Dusty O'Connell for a prominent role within the Vikings?
Well, a win for one of us is a win for all of us. So in doing so, Kevin O'Connell will also have employed you, James, and me, although we won't receive a paycheck, unfortunately. Weird kind of legal situation where if you pay one person, they're the only one to receive that money. But a win for one of us would be a win for all of us. And I think Kevin O'Connell hiring me through Dusty would be a great moment in diversity. So I
think diversity, not necessarily for Norse code or for the Vikings, but definitely for diversity's sake.
Oh yeah, I mean it's probably disastrous for the Vikings,
Yeah.
but I think you combat nepotism by hiring me.
Combating nepotism through hiring a reef. It's like that ignorance through strength thing. Right. Cold Hammer asks, question for a Reef's alternative forms of medicine corner. If I were to go ahead and indulge in a little panchakarma cleanse of my own, what location in the world to truly align myself with the universe should I perform this at?
All right. So for context, which we kind of already gave, that is the type of cleanse that Aaron Rodgers went through, performed, did, based on probably a bastardization of Ayurveda practices. I very much do not love the culture adjacent to mine being used in New Age medicine, but here we are. So Justice tweeted out the cleanse. I believe probably from Wikipedia. It looks like it's from Wikipedia, although it does not have any citations on it. Don't really care. This is very funny. So I'm just going to read it all out, 100% of it. 5 karmas. The body can be divided on the basis of the parts that need cleansing. Head, GIT, which is gastrointestinal system, upper and lower. The 5 main karmas to cleanse the complete body are Vamanam, a therapeutic emesis. Induced vomiting helps clear the upper gastro till the duodenum, end of stomach, and part of the respiratory tract. 2, Virdachanam, purgation. Induced purgation clears the lower gastro from the duodenum, end of stomach, till the exit. Anuvasana, enema using medicated oil. Oil enema helps lubricate that area and takes out all the lipid-soluble waste out through that area. It's the end of the gastrointestinal system. I'll let you use your imagination. Nasyam, nasal instillation of medicated substances helps clear the respiratory tract and paranasal sinuses. And 5, Astapanavasti, therapeutic decoction enema. Decoction enema cleanses the area from the transverse colon till the end of the gastrointestinal tract. You consume ghee, which is clarified butter, which is butter that essentially you boil down and filter out all the milk solids, which is actually great for like a lot of reasons. It raises the smoke point of it as a cooking fat. It stores for longer, and butter already stores very well. And it tastes good as a frying oil. You can't really use butter as a frying oil because of the high temperatures of frying. But these are all like reasonable reasons to use clarified butter. This is not that. You consume it, and until you evacuate both ends is a phrase that I saw. That was a life-changing experience for Aaron Rodgers. Anyway, where would you do that, Cold Hammer, to align yourself with the universe? Now, James's answer was better than mine, because mine is far away from other people, just not near anybody. But James, your answer.
My answer is Lambeau parking lot, if not inside. They'll let you shoot video too if you want to, like, to discuss the after effects on camera or whatever. There's plenty of space, there's plenty of opportunity. I can think of no better place to go through this cleanse around your Packers faithful.
In honor of Aaron Rodgers. I mean,
in honor of Aaron Rodgers, really.
Yeah.
If you could just get a whole mess of people from the Packers fan base to just do this in the parking lot of Lambeau, I can think of no more appropriate place.
So yeah, Aaron Rodgers is into a hodgepodge of non-big pharma medical practices.
Let's go with that. Patrick asks, for James's TV beer corner, which TV beer's representative wins in a fight? Duff Beer with Duff Man for The Simpsons, Puppers with Wayne from Letterkenny, or Buzz Beer with Drew Carey from The Drew Carey Show. Now, what's worth mentioning is Drew Carey was in a WWF Royal Rumble at one point. So that's worth mentioning here. Drew Carey was in a Royal Rumble once.
Wow.
Uh,
Wait, as I shouldn't say as Drew Carey, as the fictional Drew Carey,
no, as the real, like, Drew Carey,
as Drew Carey, the name Drew. Okay, got it.
yes. So Drew Carey was in a Royal Rumble. Believe he was eliminated. He's actually in the WWF Hall of Fame.
What? Why? What? Not for just being in the Royal Rumble.
Because he was in the 2001 Royal Rumble.
It was everyone who was in the 2001 Royal Rumble in the WWE Hall of Fame?
No.
I have so many questions, but all right.
Just for fun, I'll send you the link to it and let you deal with the consequences of this. As for the answer to the question, I'm going to go with Wayne from Letterkenny, who is the toughest man in Letterkenny, which apparently makes you the toughest man in Canada, which puts you pretty high worldwide. So I think that that Wayne ends up taking it for puppers. Kyle Slaby asks, James, because Arif keeps cheating on you to do football podcasts with ESPN employees, which podcast, either specific show or genre of topic, would you most like to co-host an episode of?
Oh, speaking of, I will be on the Mina Kimes show in 2 days.
Is that...
No one knew this when Kyle submitted this question.
That's fantastic, actually. That's pretty great. Actually, if I could end up on the main podcast about fantasy for ESPN.
Yes, right, exactly, yeah.
That is actually a dream of mine. And then if anyone can like get this pull, if anyone can make this happen, I will shower you with praise for the end of till the end of my days. I want to end up on his show. And I want to talk about the Hell League and I want to talk about the Norse Code League. That's all I want at this point in life. Successful kids, family, what? No, I just want to end up on Matthew Berry's show and have him be horrified at the things I have put people through for the Hell League. All I want. Also, Slaby wanted to make sure that Luke Braun got a stray here. Said, we know Luke cut out a lot of your content from his show, so hopefully it's someone better.
Oh, nowhere to go but up from there.
He did cut out my favorite joke, but I guess I understood it. Jacob Wander asks, on a scale of Ashton/Michael Kutcher to Jason/Devin McCourty, how much does Kevin O'Connell look like Matt Gaetz?
Okay, so I didn't actually know that Michael Kutcher existed. I looked him up. Very clearly fraternal twins. That is, I can't even tell that they're related. That's wild to me. And obviously Jason and Devin McCourty look very similar. I don't see Matt Gaetz in by the way, a representative for the state of Florida for the first congressional district. Maybe it's because I like Kevin O'Connell, but I just don't see much of a resemblance at all, honestly. Like, people have looked at pictures of young Bud Grant and compared it to Kevin O'Connell, and that's like kind of wish posting, honestly. Like, it's just like, I don't know what you're doing here, but that is more resemblance than this. I don't really see it. So it's closer on the Ashton and Michael Kutcher, but I mean, those two look so far apart that it's probably a 2 or a 3 instead of a 1.
Yeah. Evan Creed asks, for Arif's anti-racist apiary area, now that The Athletic has been bought by the New York Times, have you considered using your new prominence to bring awareness to the effects of B-racism with a visibility campaign on Twitter? You could mint NYT BCRT NFTs.
I hate you.
As you probably should. Kyle Segal asks, for James's taxidermy corner, if I murder a bunch of squirrels and then spear their corpses around my gardens, will they get the hint? I know you know the answer to this.
Yeah, so anytime I saw for James's corner or whatever, I just skipped over the question so that James could talk about it. But so I didn't see this question. Kyle? What the hell, man?
I guess in this case, it depends on how you kill the squirrels. If you do it with a bunch of mint and then spear their corpses, maybe. But
sorry, is mint poisonous to squirrels?
If you give them enough, probably.
But that's true for anything for anybody.
Well, yeah, that's why I said it. So if apparently they are repelled by like by strong peppermint scents. So whatever schnapps you have that you're not using, just pour out in your garden, and this could potentially cause the squirrels to get the hint without having to resort to absolute violence. But that's on you. I don't know much more about getting rid of squirrels. Sadly, that's just not a thing anymore. Don from Ohio provided us with an update to end this episode.
I cannot believe this.
Dear James and Arif, as you know, I was cheating playing Wordle to get an edge on my wife. During Valentine's Day weekend, the wife surprised me with a weekend stay at a beautiful hotel and a dinner at a great restaurant. Obviously, I felt guilt for what I had done to her, and I felt that this was the right time to come forward with the truth. The first night we were at the hotel, I told her the truth about Wordle. She was very hurt and disappointed about what I did and asked me why I would do this.
Okay, so we should end the story here. Obviously, Don does not end the story here, but that's the result of what you did, Don. You did this. Anyway, continue this awful question.
So I came clean and I told her why I did it. That it was Arif's idea. I told her how Arif gave me permission to lie to her and that it was justifiable. She didn't believe me, of course, so I played back the podcast clip of Arif giving me permission, as well as the podcast clips of James blaming Arif for all of this. Man, was she upset at Arif. Arif, she is now demanding an apology from you, as she should. So she will be listening to the podcast for your apology. Arif, do the right thing and apologize to my wife.
So I highly suspect that if the scenario is real, which obviously it's not, because there's no way you could put those podcast clips together and still come up with a way to actually blame me instead of Don. But I highly doubt she'll be listening to an unedited version of the end of this podcast. But in the off chance that the story is true and also that she's listening to the podcast, I have a couple of things that need clarification. One, it was not my idea. It was Don's idea. There's no hint of me even suggesting this. Don took it upon himself to think that he could blame me because I, in jest, said I gave Don permission to lie to his spouse, which I, of course, regretted. But the lie in question was about whether or not Don saw the Amazon order for his gifts, and he said he accidentally saw it. Now, because of what is clearly a pattern of misinformation and untruths from Don, I can't even trust his version of that story. But because of a simple accident, he saw what the wife had ordered for him. And so he wanted to know whether or not he should lie to her about having seen it. Of course, it did not end up mattering, according to Dawn, because she ended up knowing that he had seen it anyway. But at the time, I said, man, this is tough. I guess it's okay if you don't mention it. But that's about kind of it. And then I said in jest, oh, man, I blame myself because I gave Don permission to lie to his wife. So James, adding on to the bit, said, of course, Arif, this is all your fault, because it's very funny to exaggerate. That is one of the elements of humor that we employ on this show. But Don, even if all of this was true, even if I suggested to you that you cheat at Wordle and explicitly gave you permission to lie about specifically that, it would still be your fault, Don, because you're an adult and I'm not your dad.
Are you sure? Are we're
Well, we don't know about the first part of that last sentence, but
I mean,
I do know about the last part of that last sentence.
It would stand.
You are accountable for your own decisions, Don.
I would say it stands to reason that you're not his dad, considering he's older than you. So, I mean, like on principle, or is this one of those like stepdad situations where?
On the basis of chronology and most reason, yeah, I would not be. But no, I'm not Don's dad. I don't control his decisions. He controls decisions. If I had provided the most compelling case in the world to Don to do this sort of thing, it would still be his fault for doing it.
The idea of somebody cheating at Wordle when they're playing it with their spouse is just
it hurts my soul.
As somebody who does not have a spouse, I cannot imagine doing that to a Actually, no, I can imagine doing that, but only if it was, for spite and not out of love, which is what you're trying to turn this into.
Right, which is, yeah, would you typically the relationship one aspires to have with their spouse. Yes.
Yes, and not me and Aaron Rodgers' version of a relationship. So, uh, yeah, I think we're done here, Don. I think you probably should. I don't know. Deal with the giant pool of water outside your house instead of dealing with the Wordle thing, and just move on from there.
Yep.
Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Arif, before we get into where people can find your work, you wanted to say something about what happened in Texas today.
Yeah. So obviously, as we're finishing recording, a lot's been happening outside of the football bubble. Two of them in particular hit my sphere of Twitter. One of them is fairly obvious to most people. It's the conflict in Ukraine. I personally have a lot of difficulty breaking down that situation in any reasonable way. It is enormous. And from my perspective, there are not a ton of good actors here, but a lot of innocent people are going to lose their lives. And that's very upsetting. On top of that, the second thing that occurred earlier today was the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, who, and obviously I'm getting political here, so it's just a warning. If you don't want to hear me talk about this, just turn the podcast off. We're at the end of the show. But the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, had his attorney general issue essentially an interpretation of Texas law that regarded healthcare for trans youth as child abuse and required that anybody who has a duty to report instances of child abuse also report to the state whether or not a child is questioning or is trans in the state of Texas. And this refers to anybody under the age of 18. If you listen to one of the most marginalized groups of people in the United States, which are trans people in the United States, you'll know how deeply troubling this is, how many lives it puts at risk, just from the increased suicidality risk of taking away support networks for children who absolutely need that support, who are questioning their gender identity or know their gender identity and know it doesn't fit the way that they present to the world in whatever way. The impact that it has on their emotional and physical health is so enormous that there are people in Texas that are so worried that they're trying to find ways to leave the state as a result of this interpretation. Now, there are a couple of ways that, and this one, because it's personal to me and seems much more actionable from my end in terms of things that I can do or things that people who listen to the show can do, is something that I want people to contribute towards. This is just a big day, and I'm glad that people wanted to listen to a football podcast, which is sometimes a beekeeping podcast, which is sometimes a super unqualified parenting podcast. And I understand that people want to kind of escape from how crazy that is, how crazy everything kind of outside of it is. But there are lives at risk, and I just don't know what to do or what to think about the situation in Ukraine. But I do know what to think, and I do know what people should do, or I think they should do. With regards to Texas specifically, I feel like people should, look up organizations that will provide support to people in Texas. And I'm still trying to find the best organization to be able to do that. But two organizations that I know are at least doing something. Again, I don't know if these are the best organizations or the most impact that your money can have, but I do know that if you provide donation or support, that these organizations will provide a positive impact. So I don't know if it's the most useful method of providing money, but I do know it is an effective method of providing money. One is ACLU Texas. That's specifically ACLU Texas, not the ACLU at large. A lot of people I know have a lot of issues with the ACLU, and that's fine. And if you don't want to donate to the ACLU, either the Texas version or at large, whatever, I totally get it. But they seem to be at the forefront of the litigation portion of this fight in terms of preventing Texas from being able to execute what is essentially a memorandum of understanding that I shouldn't say forces, but provides guidance for agencies in terms of how they act here. And so the department in charge of essentially family services in Texas has indicated that they will take this advisement and evaluate it. And generally speaking, executive agencies and American governmental systems will take on, not always, but will take on the interpretations of the executive. And so I'm really worried for what's going to happen. And so the ACLU is going to be fighting in court on this issue. Also, there's an emergency fund for the Transgender Education Network of Texas. Now, there's a lot of people that I know of in the trans community that are cynical about the value of awareness and education, and I'm very sympathetic to those arguments, but this is the Emergency Relief Fund, which is a little bit different. Right now, the Emergency Relief Fund in Texas for trans youth is being swamped. So if you are applying for the Emergency Relief Fund, it might be difficult. The fund right now is overwhelmed with a high volume of responses, but that means they need funding. And you can donate there. I'll provide a link in the show notes to both the ACLU Texas and to the Texas Transgender Education Network to provide that kind of donation. And even more important than providing a donation to either of those two would be, if you know anybody at risk in Texas, find ways to help them directly. That's the most efficient way you can use your money. So at least to me. So this is an issue that's very important to me. I think a lot of lives are at risk for an already extraordinarily marginalized population. A lot of people I know that don't know anybody in Texas were crying today because of this news. It's deeply personal, and the sense of vulnerability for this community has skyrocketed. I mean, I was talking to somebody as they were learning the news, and questioned the concept of whether or not things are getting better. That person doesn't even live in the United States and is distraught. So I cannot overstate the criticality of what's happening and the knock-on effects that it might have across the United States, and in particularly states that already don't have strong protections for trans people. So that's what I wanted to get out there. I don't do this a lot, obviously, on Norse Code. I have a political podcast that a lot fewer people listen to than here on Norse Code, and I understand why. But I just wanted to get that out there because it impacted a lot of people I know personally. A lot of people.
So, Arif, where can they find your work?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can find me at The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. I've, of course, written a couple of articles recently. One about Kevin O'Connell that I mentioned, one about obviously the Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford thing. I've got a couple of pieces coming out on Gophers offensive lineman that declared for the draft. And also I'm going to have a piece on Ed Donatel and the Vikings defense.
All right. So that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll be back in about 2 weeks to discuss Vikings news and other stuff about the league. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we'll be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of The Athletic, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagoshnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.